Excellent. Well, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to our webinar on the 6 simple steps to developing an asset management policy. My name is Ian Cranston. I'm originally from the UK. I moved to Canada back in 2011. I've now developed this pretty weird Scottish-Canadian accent, so bear with me through this webinar. If anything doesn't make sense, just throw a question in the chat and we'll re-explain things. I created IC Infrastructure back in 2017. IC Infrastructure is a small boutique asset management training and consulting company. We're really passionate about helping organizations build their own capacity and knowledge around asset management to do more themselves and make sure they're on the right path, taking the right steps. Over the years, I've worked with at least 18 communities to develop their own asset management policies, so very excited to be here today to show you some tips and tricks that we've learned over the years. We're currently working with 2 communities right now, actively on developing their policy, and we've got this exciting program coming up that we're going to tell you about towards the end of this. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter. My email address is there as well if you want to reach out to me directly. I sit on the ISO 55000 committee, so I'm a global asset management expert that's part of the TC251 group. I'll talk a little bit about ISO 55000 when we get into some of the content. I also was on the CNAM board of directors, so that's the Canadian Network of Asset Managers, an industry group, a non-profit group that's working on asset management best practice. So I sat on their board for a number of years, and I've also been involved over the last few years as their program manager for a number of big programs that they've been doing, including their new to asset management program and the development of the competency framework. We'll talk a little bit about some of those things as we go through this. And prior to that, I was a consultant with Jacobs or CH2M Hill, worked with infrastructure owners across North America to develop policy, strategy, roadmaps, investment planning frameworks, level of service, full spectrum of asset management work. One of the projects that I was involved in there was as program manager for an industry project called How to Develop an Asset Management Policy, Strategy and Governance Framework. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. And even prior to that, I have an engineering degree. I worked as a lean consultant, mainly focused in local government and the water sector. But that's a little bit about how I've got here today for you. So today's agenda, what are we going to cover? We'll do a little bit on setting the stage. So a couple of slides on, what is asset management. This is definitely not, what is an asset management course, but there's a couple of things that I wanted to just recap for people so we're all in the right headspace. Bit of an overview of what an asset management policy is, but really the focus of this is going to be on these 6 simple steps to develop an asset management policy. We've got some other resources on our website and elsewhere around some of the other topics in asset management and more on kind of what is an asset management policy, but we really want to focus today on the steps that you're going to take to develop your policy and really help you see that this isn't it's not a huge amount of work, it's not a huge amount of time or complexity, and if you follow these steps, you'll be able to get your asset management policy developed. And then we'll end off with some resources to help you in terms of developing your own policy. We built a do-it-yourself program that you can follow to get your own asset management policies established. So excited to share with you what that program's all about. Now, we're going to use Slido throughout this webinar for a couple of polls that we've got. You can also use Slido for submitting questions that you might have. And there's also some downloads on the Slido platform as part of this as well. So if you head over to slido.com and use the code hashtag 6steps, or you can use your phone and scan the QR code. You can either open it up as an internet browser on your laptop, or you can have it running on your phone. But once you've logged in, keep that there handy because we'll use it a few times during the session. And again, that's where you're going to submit your questions. What it looks like when you log in, so again, slido.com, hashtag 6steps. This is what you'll see. In the top right here, you can click on your profile, you can enter your name and an email address. That's if there's questions that we don't have time to answer in this session, we'll make sure we answer them afterwards. So having your email in there is important for us to contact you and answer those questions directly. The Q&A field is where you can start typing in your questions. You can put questions in throughout the session and we'll answer them at the end. We've got time for some open Q&A then. There's also polls. So as I mentioned, there's going to be a few points for polls during the session. So they'll get activated in that polls menu there. And then on the left side here, there's some links for other information. So some downloads that we reference and some other links that we'll talk about during the session. So here's the first poll question here. Does your organization have an asset management policy? So again, go to slido.com, hashtag 6steps, and put in your responses there. So yes, we have one, but we don't really use it. Yes, we've got it and we use it to guide our decisions. No, we'd like one. No, we don't really think it would help. So what have we got here in the group? Cross-section of different people from around the world, as well as different organization types. So so keen to hear what stage you guys are at. Okay, interesting. So good mix of people in there. We'll talk about all these things. So as we go through this session, there's different points that we'll talk about all the different bits. Interesting that there's a good few of you here that have one but don't really use it, and a lot of you here that don't have one and would like one. So good. We'll get through all of these points here. Thank you for your responses there. So for those of you that do have an asset management policy, I want you to think about, is your policy being used? Is it something that we're using to guide our decisions and our efforts, be it the way that we're investing in projects, the way that we're investing our time and activities and change efforts that are going on in the organization? Has the policy been reviewed recently, or is it something that was written kind of 5-10 years ago and has never really been reconsidered? And are staff all aware of it? Is it a policy that is, it was done and it's hiding on a shelf and nobody really knows about it, or is it something that's getting communicated out to staff? And for those of you that don't have a policy yet, is there a clear understanding amongst the staff in the organisation of how asset management is going to help us to achieve our service goals? Are the views of asset management consistent between the senior parts of the organisation and staff and managers underneath? Or is there a disconnect with what managers think this is about and leaders think this is about versus what staff are trying to do? Is there that disconnect and that inconsistency in understanding of asset management there? Or are you finding that your elected officials are kind of pushing you and making decisions in the organisation that aren't aligned with what you believe to be as asset management practices and principles and the goals that you're trying to pursue as an organisation? We see that in a lot of communities. So a few things there to consider if you've got one or you don't have one yet. And if you answered no to any of those questions, you're in the right place today. So excited to talk through how an asset management policy and the steps you're going to take is going to start to address some of those challenges that you're seeing. An asset management policy is a really important part of setting that direction in your organisation and establishing that culture of asset management, giving people a clear understanding of what this is about, how we should be behaving, and the things that we should be striving to implement as an organisation from a principles perspective. So how is an asset management policy going to help exactly? So throughout the session today, I've got a few quotes from various clients that we've worked with over the years. Here's one from the District of Summerlands. I think one of the key benefits of the policy is as a communications tool. By having a clear defined principle statements that helps bring our staff and council on board with asset management, everyone can see what asset management is and which asset management principles are going to move us forward as an organisation. It's really getting everyone on that same page with understanding what we're trying to do here and the direction that we're heading in. And that point around it being a communications tool is something we're going to come back to a few different times because it's a really important, an important part of the policy. Just getting it written is only one step in the journey, and using it in the organisation is really, really important. So who's our programme designed for? Well, primarily this is around community infrastructure owners. So think towns and cities, regions, governments, different types of communities, public infrastructure owners. That's really what a lot of the content is geared towards. You hear us talk about councils and elected officials, but all infrastructure owners are welcome. Just know that some of the terminology is a little bit different. So when I'd be talking about a council, a private infrastructure owner would talk about a board, but a lot of the concepts and the steps that we're talking about are the same. So absolutely everybody is welcome to join the programme, but a lot of the language is geared towards community infrastructure owners. Staff at all levels of the organisation are welcome in this. We've worked with different levels in terms of getting asset management efforts and journeys rolling, starting to get policies crafted. Everybody plays a part throughout the organisation. The programme as well has an interesting networking side of things. It's really, really important to be sharing experiences and learning from other communities. A great way to fast track your asset management journey. It's specifically targeted around people that are new to their asset management journeys or trying to formalise more of their asset management efforts, and that will make a little bit more sense when we get into the definition of asset management. And also for anyone that's looking for guidance in developing their policy, but wanting to do some more themselves. So our programme is very much on this kind of DIY basis, getting hands-on with yourself and pushing your own policy forward. And just anyone that wants to learn more about asset management. So welcome, glad to have you here. We'll get into all the details now. So what is asset management? So as public infrastructure owners and communities, you own a lot of assets. So lots and lots of different infrastructure assets, expensive things you've got, be it roads, pipes, sewers, you can have parks, libraries. There's other infrastructure assets that are out there as well, obviously, and utilities play a big role, electricity. There's all these things around that we have and we're responsible for. And we're trying to make decisions on those. We're trying to look after those assets and make sure that they're around. But ultimately, those assets only exist to deliver a service. They exist to deliver some sort of services and value to the community that we serve. And that's this kind of this connection that needs to happen. And we need to really keep this whole concept front of mind that we exist and our assets exist as public infrastructure organizations to deliver quality of life. You know, it's so important, everything that we're doing and the way that we're using our assets, they all exist to deliver quality of life and service to our community. So it's really, really important to have that in perspective, and a lot of the things that we'll talk about when you get into some of the policy principles are really about being service focused, really about making sure that it's not just about looking after assets, it's about looking after assets in their service context. And again, it's so important for us in the space that we're in as community infrastructure owners. So here's the definition of asset management that we like to use. This is from the Leadership in Asset Management programme. So that handbook that I talked about earlier from FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, that I was involved in developing a number of years ago. There's a link to this in the Slido forum as well. So the How to Develop an Asset Management Policy, Strategy and Governance Framework. That programme, called the LAMP programme, brought together 12 municipalities from across Canada to develop some best practice around asset management, particularly around policy, strategy and governance. But this is the definition that that group came up with. Asset management is an integrated approach involving all organisation departments to effectively manage existing and new assets to deliver services to customers. So just to unpack that a little bit, this is about delivering services to customers. Okay. Yes, we have to look after our assets, but this is really about delivering services to customers. To do that, we have to effectively manage both our existing assets and our new assets. You know, it's not just about building new things all the time. We have existing assets that we're responsible for and have to make sure that we're looking after and in the combined way so that we're delivering that service to customers. It must be an integrated approach involving all organisation departments. So you can't do this in isolation within an organization department, okay? Like this isn't just an engineering thing or just a finance thing. Like everybody has to work together. We have to have the engineers around the table, the planners, operations, finance. There's lots and lots of things happening in the organization. We have to be working together to do this effectively. The intent is to maximize benefits, reduce risk, and provide a satisfactory level of service to the community in a sustainable manner, providing an optimum balance. And that's something you'll see the asset management industry talk about a lot, is around this optimum balance. You know, we've got so many complications and competing priorities. all we can do is make the best possible decision that we can. It's not always going to be perfect. There's going to be trade-offs and problems that we have to try and deal with. But really, we're trying to make the best decision that we possibly can to find that right balance for us as an organisation. And good asset management practices are fundamental to achieving sustainable communities. So are we going to exist long into the future for the next generation? The decisions that we're making today on our services and our assets have got a huge implication in the next 5, 10 and 50 years. So it's really important that we get them right. Now, just to get into this a little bit, again, this is not an asset management training course, but just something that as people are starting to get their head around their asset management journey, it can feel pretty overwhelming. It can feel like there's a lot of different things that need to happen. How are you going to get it all done? I want you to remember that this is not something that's new. This is not something that's brand new. You're already doing lots of things in your organization, and the process of asset management and formalizing your asset management practices is just better connecting those puzzle pieces together. Yes, there might be some gaps, but you're definitely not starting from a blank sheet. So here's the layout of an asset management system. So you'll hear me talk more about a management system later. But this is this hierarchy of things in your organization you want to start putting in place. So starting at the bottom here, we've got our operations work. So yeah, we're operating and maintaining our assets on a day-to-day basis. Things are rolling and happening. Our asset management plans should be pulling things together in terms of, what are these assets doing? What do they exist in a system? What are those overall services doing? We've got our water system, which is built up of these pipes, this pump station, and this is the services that we're trying to deliver with that system. So the asset management plans are kind of asset focused, looking at what are the services that we're delivering with those assets, and are we making the right decisions around that? Your asset management strategy is taking that bigger look of asset management across the organization and our practices. So what are the things that we need to be doing? How do we think about risk in the organization? How do we think about service? How does the data flow around the organization? All these processes and parts and bits of the puzzle, the strategy is where we really start to bring it together. So the strategies are a hard document to come together, but they're a really valuable document to put together for your organization. Now, your asset management policy is setting these principles that we want to be following. So what are these high-level statements, the way that we want to be acting and behaving and thinking about asset management? Because once we can start to articulate those principle statements, it makes all those other bits a lot simpler. So when we're talking about our strategy, we're talking about our asset management plans, we're talking about the way we operate and maintain our assets. If we're really clear about the principles that we want to follow, that makes all those details easier to work out if we've got those principles articulated. Now, those principles that we're going to define through your asset management policy must be aligned with your organizational strategic plans, your vision for the organization. Where are you heading? What does the organization look like in 10, 20, 50 years? Because we need to make sure that our principle statements are aligned and enabling where we're heading as an organization. And by doing that, what you start to create is this line of sight through the organization. So we start to have our vision that's being properly enabled through our principles and our policy, our business processes through our asset management strategy, and the way that we're making a lot of this stuff happen is clearly articulated. We have the right governance in place to make sure that it's happening. That is then happening to our assets and our services through our asset management plans. And we have our organizational strategies in there. Okay, so what is an asset management policy? So ISO, the International Standards Group, talks about a policy as being the intentions and directions of an organization as formally expressed by its top management. Okay, so again, it's setting that intention for what we're doing as an organization. Now, when we take that into an asset management context, an asset management policy explains the intentions and directions of our organization with regards to how it realizes the value that we're going to get from our assets and delivering our services. Now, the crux of the policy are around these principle statements, these policy statements. We want them to be guiding things for how we're going to develop the rest of the system. So the rest of this management system, be it all the different processes that we have in place, the different puzzle pieces that come together, the principles are going to help guide the development of that and make sure that we're doing the right things for our organization that are, again, enabling our vision. Now here's an interesting quote from the City of Windsor. So the policy for them has definitely been a tool that they've been able to reference back to, including when we brought our asset management plan to council with recommended funding levels. The policy was a way in which we reminded ourselves administratively and with council as to what we committed to in those policies and what our goals are. So having those principles outlined with how we want to behave as an organisation, when it comes to actually making this stuff happen, we can reflect back in the policy and say, hey, like, we agreed to these principles for a reason, and this is the result of it. Is we have these asset management plans that are recommending X, Y, and Z funding levels. We've agreed to these principles in our policy, and this is what it's going to take to make these things happen. So let's get into the 6 steps now. So step 1, you need to identify your sponsor. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Step 2 is agreeing on the scope of your policy. Step 3 is around actually drafting your document. I've got some tips for you on that. And then the second part of this is reviewing and refining this with your stakeholders. So lots of different stakeholders around the organisation that you need to engage. Have the policy endorsed by your council or your board. And then step 6 is around communicating it to staff. So let's get into these in a bit more detail. Again, this has been adapted from some of the things that we developed years ago in the LAMP handbook, which again is a download you can get from the Slido system. So step 1, identifying your senior sponsor. Now, this is key. I cannot understate the importance of having a senior sponsor that is advocating for asset management at the top of the organisation amongst the other people in the senior leadership team. Anywhere that I've seen asset management struggle and stall out in an organisation or not get rolling, it's because there's been a lack of senior sponsorship. Okay, you have to find that person that can really help you advocate for asset management at the top of the organisation. In some of our other training courses around asset management, we talk a lot more about that and some of the things that you can do to help build that buy-in with your senior sponsors. They need to have a full understanding of what you're trying to do here, full understanding of the policy, its purpose, and the content of it. Get them involved early in the process so that they feel part of this process as well. Makes it a lot easier for them to advocate for the work that you're doing, the asset management work that's going on, if they feel part of that development process as well. So step 1, identify your senior sponsor. So yeah, poll for you here. Does your organization have a senior sponsor? So is it obvious to you that is it clear who your senior sponsor is within your organization for your asset management program? Someone on your leadership team, someone on your board of directors that is really taking this forward. So in the polls there, seeing a lot of you, yes, you have a clear senior sponsor. That's excellent. For those of you that don't, please do reach out to us afterwards. Happy to have a chat with you about some tips and tricks for getting that engagement and buy-in with your senior sponsor. Okay, step 2, agree on the scope and structure of your policy. Okay, is there a standard template? Is there a standard look and feel that other policies in your organization have got? Yours should look like other policies. Yes, the content's different, but there might be a standard that you need to follow within your organization for policies. So get your hands on other policies in your organization. What services and assets is this going to apply to? When we think about asset management across the organization, what's involved in this? Like, what services do we deliver? What are all the different assets that we're responsible for and we're trying to look after? We need to agree early on in our process, like what the scope of this policy is. If we've got time at the end, there's a couple of interesting stories I can share on that as well. And look at other relevant policies in your organization that we might need to connect with. So a couple of interesting ones to think about. There might be a couple of financial policies that you need to make reference to in terms of what you think about as a capital asset. You might also have some other maintenance policies that are relevant, or some other service policies, or even risk work that's going on in your organization. So get that understanding of what your structure and scope and what some of the connections are with your policy in your organization. So that's step 2. Step 3 is drafting the document. Okay, so I want to talk about this for a little bit because this is something that needs to be thought about and considered. Now, do not write this by yourself in isolation and pop out the end with a process, with a policy. You know, like it's very easy to actually get the words on paper and develop some sort of document. You can just copy and paste another one that you've seen online and say, hey, here's our policy. You need to remember that this is really about trying to win the hearts and minds in the organization. And that process of actually developing your policy collaboratively with key stakeholders across the organization is a real big benefit to your organization. You know, it really starts to build that culture, that awareness, that buy-in for asset management across the organization. And a great way to do this is through workshops with your steering committee. So if you don't have an asset management steering committee in your organization, it's something I would thoroughly encourage you to set up. So that is a cross representation from around the organization of relevant stakeholders that are going to be involved in asset management. Bring them together as a steering committee and use that as a working group to collaboratively develop your policy. Okay, this can just be through a couple of workshops. You can go way offline, type up some of the notes and produce a kind of polished draft after each session. But workshops with your steering committee are the fastest and most effective way to get your policy drafted. Use other policies, other asset management policies from other organizations to help see what's out there. Learn from other organizations, make them your own. So take things and examples and use others as reference and bring them in. And use that as a way to develop a lot of your own content, is by seeing what's out there and leveraging some of the examples that are already there. And again, just a reminder, the principles should be pretty high level. Okay, the principles that we're talking about in the policy should be pretty high level. They need to enable your direction and the vision of where you're heading as an organization. Now, one of the reasons that those need to be high level is that the details are going to be within your strategy in terms of how you do these things. You know, we want to be making risk-based decisions. Like, that's a principle in our policy statement. We want to be service focused, and that's another example of a principle. The details of how you make that happen in your organization need to be put elsewhere, because the details can change. You need your policy to stand the test of time, stand the test of council changes, leadership changes. These principles should be high level, relatively common sense things that again enable where we're heading as an organization. But that makes it harder for a change in leadership or a change in council to radically change the course that we're taking. Yes, the details can be different, but those need to be further elsewhere in the management system. So once you've gone through that process of getting that drafted, again, workshops are a really good, effective way to do that. Through that workshop process, you've already started to engage key stakeholders in your process. Okay, so they're part of the process. They've been involved in helping you get that document drafted. They feel bought into that process. They feel heard. But there's going to be other stakeholders that we need to engage, other people in the organization that we need to think about, making sure that they believe in the policy, that they understand what it's about, give them an opportunity to comment on it. An important group there to think about is the management team. So yeah, your steering committee might have a couple of people from your management team, including your senior sponsor, but there's going to be other people from around the organization part of that as well. But making sure that we're going to have appropriate engagement with the management team as well, to make sure that they're bought into this, because ultimately they need to support it going up to council and board for sign off. And a good question to be asking all of your stakeholders as you're going through this, and especially your management team, is, are these realistic? You know, are the principles and the direction that we're going in an organization, is this realistic for us to implement? You know, are we going to be able to resource this? You know, if we're talking about, improving our data or doing, more complete condition assessments on things, like, do we have the ability to do that? Like, are we going to resource that as an organization? Yes, okay, great. We can build that into our roadmap and look at how we're going to be financing some of these activities going forward. But if not, what do we need to change? Like, how do we adjust our principles to make sure that it's realistic for us to actually implement these things? Okay, so that the really important step is going through that review and refinement. And it can change. It's okay to be having those discussions with your management team and other stakeholders and coming back to the steering committee to say, okay, there's a couple of tweaks that we want to make. That's fine. Step 5, have the policy endorsed. So bringing it up to council, if there's another level of leadership you need to be thinking about, getting that policy in front of them and having those discussions with them is really important. Now, they might have a pretty low level of asset management understanding, particularly a lot of councils that we've worked with. They're not familiar with what asset management is or the benefits of an organization. So you might need to think about providing awareness training to your councils or to your leadership teams ahead of presenting the policy. Okay, so something to think about there. There's a couple of videos that we found really useful for sharing with councils. And we put a link to some of our favorite videos in the Slido chat as well. Agree with your senior sponsor who's best to present these things to council. So is it something that is better coming from them as the senior sponsor, or is it something that's good to come from you as one of the asset management coordinators or as part of that steering committee? Have that discussion and understand how this is going to be communicated up. Listen to the elected officials, okay? Understand what their concerns are, what questions they've got, through that awareness training, through the policy endorsement process. They'll start to build up their understanding of asset management as well, and help them understand like what this is all about, the steps that are going to happen next, and use that as a way to address some of the concerns that they might have to get them fully supportive of what you're doing as an organization. And here's another poll question here for you. Does your organization, council or the board support asset management? Yes, but other initiatives often take precedence, so that's a leading one there. And yeah, a lot of them just aren't aware of it. So that's another point around that awareness training that needs to go on. Okay, so let's push on a little bit. The last step is around communicating this to staff. So I noticed in the first poll that came up, a lot of you were saying you have a policy, but it isn't really used. This step 6 is something that's often not done in an organization, and it results in you having a policy that's just going to sit on the shelf and not be used. So we need to make sure that we communicate this policy to staff, make sure that we've got the right level of understanding to make sure that people understand what this is about and the importance of it, making sure that it's communicated as a big thing for the organization. Think about how you're communicating to those staff. It isn't just one email that goes out when you've got it. Like, are the management teams and the different groups of the organization, do they understand how it fits with what they do? Are you giving managers throughout the organization the understanding and the talking points that they can have with their teams around why asset management is important and how it impacts them and their group? And consider ways to make it more visible to people. So, yes, we've got that policy that goes out, and it's the formal document that gets written up. But something that we've seen a lot of organizations do, and we've got a few examples that we might be able to show with you around a poster version of the policy. So a poster version that is easier for staff to digest, it's a bit more visible. You could have that printed up and put it in the canteen, in the works yards, like wherever it is that the staff are going to see, and it's something that's front of mind for them to have those principles front of mind for them. Again, as you're going through the different parts of your management system, constantly be reflecting back and thinking, right, as we're developing these different areas, like, are we still in line with the principles in our policy? And linked to that, we talk about having an annual review process. So when you're looking at your asset management program, are we on track with what we started to do at the outset of this? And are there adjustments that need to be made to our program, the things that we're trying to impact? But this point around communicating it to staff is something that's often not done, and that means that the policy just remains a bit of paper that sits on the shelf. So making sure that you're communicating it to staff regularly, understanding the different ways that you can communicate to staff, and think about ways that you can make it a bit more visible. And again, a poster version is a really interesting way to do that. Okay, now a few slides here on this new program that we've got around how you can develop your own asset management policy. And then we've got time for a little bit of questions here. So we've helped a number of organizations, as I mentioned, with their asset management policies. Here's another quote from the County of Grand Prairie. Building our asset management policy with IC Infrastructure has given us a new perspective on asset management. With the guidance from IC Infrastructure, we're able to get our team focusing on the positive benefits of asset management instead of the negative consequences. This asset management policy really helped shape our program into the solid state it's in today. So getting those principles defined and understanding how we want to be behaving and the direction we're going with our asset management efforts really helps lay that foundation and makes the details in your efforts in terms of your strategy and your asset management plans a lot easier if you can get that articulated right in your policy at the top. So we're very excited to be putting together this online peer program, basically a DIY, do-it-yourself asset management policy program that you can come through and develop your own customized infrastructure policy. So over the course of the program, if you follow the steps, you're basically going to emerge from it with your own asset management policy. So the program details, there is bite-sized self-paced e-learning modules. So we've built a lot of different videos on the different steps. So we cover each of those 6 steps in a lot more detail. There's step-by-step instructions and guidance on some of those details in each of those steps and the things that you need to do, along with some checklists, templates, a lot of example policies as well. As I mentioned, there's a lot that you can leverage from other policies that are out there. There's lots you can find on Google as well. And we've also put in some added benefits in the program. We have like a full package where there's a lot more networking with peers. So getting groups of you together are trying to develop your policy right now, helping each other through this process, connecting with other people that have done it as well. So bringing in some different industry experts and people to talk to you. We also have one-on-one coaching available. We're able to review your policy at the different stages to help you make sure that it's capturing best practice and highlighting some of the pitfalls that some organizations get into. Anyone that's coming through the programs are also eligible for professional development hours or continuing education credits that you might need to get as part of your professional designations, and lots more. So if you head over to our website, you'll see a lot more on the packages there. There's different intakes of the program, so we're going to be running this several times in different iterations. Again, check our website for details. So the next group, in terms of timing, our next full package kicks off at the end of this month, so end of February. The full package is spaced out over 4 months, and that's a deliberate kind of time to give you the time to make this happen. So again, you're going to come out of this program with a policy. You're going to follow those 6 steps. So over a 3-4 month period, we can walk you through each of those steps, give you the coaching and support that you need throughout each of those steps, and you'll emerge at the end with a policy. Lots of connections with peers and learning from others as well, so really excited about that part of it. So that full package there is available. You can bring 3 team members on it. So I know a number of you are coming to this with other team members, which is great. Again, this is a team effort and lots of people involved there. So our group program there, we're able to offer you guys a discount as being part of this webinar. So thank you for your time here. We'll share the code with you. It's in Slido, the discount code to use on our website. We can take credit cards on our website and you give the discount code there to drop that. If you just want the e-learning bit, we also offer that. So that is kind of asynchronous learning. You can start at any time and work your way through the content and checklists and everything there at your own pace. So that's there available as an option for you too. As another little thing, the full package, we've got 2 more spaces in our kind of advanced group that you'll get extra one-on-one coaching sessions. So for the next 2 people at no additional cost, you'll get extra coaching one-to-one sessions in there as well. Okay. So yeah, happy to answer any questions that people have got on that. But that is just our DIY program. Again, you're going to walk through that and come out at the end of it with your own asset management policy that's appropriate for your organization. And that's us finished with the formal presentation here. So we've got a few minutes now, time for some questions. If anyone's got anything that we'd like to go through. So let me just have a look at the policies here. So a good question here on, do you list the roles and responsibilities at a high level in the policy or in the strategy? Good question, good question. And as you start to look at some of the examples of policies that are out there, you will see people doing different things. Now, it's pretty common in a lot of policies for high-level roles and responsibilities to be articulated. Now, I stress the high-level part of it. It's, council will be responsible for this, the senior leadership team will be responsible for this, the asset management committee will be responsible for this, and it's not a long list of responsibilities. It's high level. The reason that you want to, again, keep that high level is you want to kind of set that intention and the principles for what you think those different roles are going to be, but a lot of the details will need to fall into the strategy, because you don't want to be having to revamp or recreate the policy anytime there's an organizational change or a reshuffle that happens. The policy should be able to stand the test of a reorg within the organization. But it is good to get some of those high level intentions set out in terms of some of those roles that are out there. But again, if you pull up some example policies, you'll see some of those different levels of detail that are in there. So good question. And yeah, I would encourage the details to be within your strategy of your roles and responsibilities, but some of the high level intentions around that to be in your policy, because again, that gets it locked in with council, locked in with your leadership team as well. Very good. Okay, should we create an asset management policy at the department level or at an organization level? So should there be an asset management policy for our parks department and for our roads department, or should we just have one for the whole organization? I would strongly encourage you to have one for the whole organization. These principles that we're talking about should apply to all of your different asset classes and all of your different service levels. Whether we're talking about being service focused or making risk-based decisions, thinking holistically, thinking in the big picture, those are things that we want to be doing across the organization, not just within one department. So I would encourage you to have one policy for the whole of your organization. Yes, your asset management plans might be asset and service specific. Your strategy might even be a little bit different in terms of how you deploy some of these things in different areas, but your principles should be the same. So I would encourage you to have one policy for your organization. You're all dealing with the same kind of set of stakeholders. You're serving like the one kind of community. You're delivering a consistent kind of range of services, so one policy should be adequate for that. What other questions do we have in here? What are the biggest benefits you see in an organization after you have completed an asset management policy? Well, there's lots of things in there. There was a couple of points that came up in some of those quotes from some of our clients over the years. So again, you saw the City of Windsor using that as a way to help validate why some things are being done. So as you get down your asset management journey, you're going to have to make some difficult decisions. We're going to have to make difficult decisions around some of the investments that we make, difficult decisions around some of the places that we focus our time and our efforts. Your policy is a way to help you validate why you're doing that. We agreed that these policies, this policy and these principles were how we wanted to be behaving when it comes to asset management, and how we want to be setting our organization and our community up for future success. So yes, while it's difficult, these are the intentions, and this is why we set it up. So giving people that understanding of why we're doing that is a really important part and a really good benefit. So it gives you that protection as to some of the activities that you're doing in your asset management roadmap and through your strategy, some of those things that are happening. The other benefit is around that culture of asset management. So creating that culture in your organization, getting people understanding why we're doing this and using that as a communication tool, coming back to that first quote that we brought on, helping this be a way for people to understand why we're doing this. So that's a really big benefit there as well. So maybe not one biggest benefit, two good big benefits there. Okay, so just conscious of the time, I know we wanted to keep this to 45 minutes, and that's just a couple of minutes over. There's a couple of questions that we didn't get to answer, but we will make sure we follow up with individuals after that. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. And we hope to see a number of you on our training program that's coming up with the DIY on developing your own asset management policy. So we'll send a follow-up email with some of the links that we've had here, as well as a recording session there too. And you'll also be able to get a copy of the slides. But thank you very much for joining us. Really wish you all the best in your asset management journeys.